What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you think about TikTok, social media, and what's happening to an entire generation of American children. We are witnessing the systematic neurological destruction of Generation Z and Generation Alpha through the most sophisticated psychological manipulation tool ever created. And the evidence of actual brain damage is now undeniable. This isn't moral panic about kids these days, or nostalgic complaints about technology. This is documented, measurable, irreversible harm being inflicted on millions of developing brains through a platform designed by a foreign adversary to weaken American society from within. The scientific evidence is overwhelming, the psychological damage is permanent, and the implications for America's future are catastrophic. By the time I'm finished explaining what TikTok is actually doing to young brains, you'll understand why this isn't just an app, it's a weapon of mass neurological destruction that's creating a generation of Americans who can't think critically, can't focus on complex tasks, and can't function without constant digital stimulation. Let me start with Emma Rodriguez, a 16-year-old honor student from Columbus, Ohio. In 2019, Emma was a strata student who read novels for pleasure, played violin in the school orchestra, and was planning to study pre-med in college. She was curious, focused, and had what her teachers described as exceptional analytical thinking skills. Emma downloaded TikTok in March 2020 during COVID lockdown, initially just to watch funny videos and stay connected with friends. Within 6 months, Emma's entire personality and cognitive functioning had changed so dramatically that her parents took her to a neurologist, convinced she had developed a brain tumor or suffered some kind of head injury. Emma could no longer read for more than 5 minutes without experiencing anxiety and restlessness. Her grades plummeted from A's to C's and D's. She lost interest in violin and quit the orchestra. She became incapable of having conversations that lasted longer than a few minutes without checking her phone. Her sleep schedule became completely disrupted, and she developed severe anxiety when separated from her device. But the most alarming change was in Emma's cognitive abilities. Tasks that previously came easily to her, like writing essays, solving complex math problems, or analyzing literature, became impossibly difficult. Emma's attention span had shrunk from hours to minutes. Her ability to engage in deep sequential thinking had been replaced by a need for constant, rapid stimulation. Emma's parents initially blamed the changes on typical teenage behavior or COVID stress, but when they restricted Emma's TikTok access as an experiment, her symptoms intensified dramatically. Emma experienced what could only be described as withdrawal symptoms, severe anxiety, depression, physical agitation, and an inability to function normally until TikTok access was restored. What Emma's parents didn't understand is that their daughter had become neurologically addicted to TikTok's dopamine manipulation system, and her brain had been fundamentally rewired by exposure to the platform's psychological warfare algorithms. Emma wasn't choosing to use TikTok compulsively. Her brain had been hijacked by technology, specifically designed to create addiction and dependency. Emma's story is being repeated millions of times across America. But most parents don't recognize what's happening because the changes occur gradually and are often attributed to normal teenage development or other factors. But the scientific evidence reveals that TikTok usage is causing measurable, permanent changes to developing brains that will affect these young people for the rest of their lives. Dr. Anna Lembeck, a Stanford University psychiatrist and addiction specialist, has documented how TikTok's algorithm creates dopamine responses that are more intense and more addictive than traditional drugs. The rapid-fire delivery of short, highly stimulating content triggers dopamine spikes that flood the brain's reward system, creating physical dependency that manifests as withdrawal symptoms when access is restricted. But TikTok's impact goes far beyond simple addiction. Neuroimaging studies have shown that heavy TikTok usage actually changes the physical structure of developing brains, reducing gray matter in areas responsible for attention, planning, and impulse control while strengthening neural pathways associated with immediate gratification and compulsive behavior. Dr. Dimitri Christakis, director of the Center for Child Health, Behavior and Development at Seattle Children's Hospital, has published research showing that exposure to rapid sequence digital content during critical developmental periods literally prevents normal brain development. The constant stimulation prevents the formation of neural networks necessary for sustained attention, deep thinking, and emotional regulation. These aren't temporary changes that reverse when screen time is reduced. These are permanent alterations to brain architecture that occur during critical developmental windows. A 14-year-old who spends 3 hours per day on TikTok is developing a fundamentally different brain structure than previous generations, with reduced capacity for the cognitive skills necessary for academic success, career achievement, and meaningful relationships. The attention span data is particularly alarming. Microsoft's research shows that the average human attention span has decreased from 12 seconds in 2000 to 8 seconds in 2023. But for heavy TikTok users, attention spans are often measured in seconds rather than minutes. These young people literally cannot focus on any single task for more than a few moments without experiencing anxiety and compulsive urges to seek digital stimulation, but the cognitive damage extends far beyond attention problems. TikTok's algorithm specifically promotes content that triggers emotional responses: anger, fear, excitement, outrage, because emotional arousal increases engagement and platform retention. This constant emotional stimulation is training young brains to require intense emotional experiences to feel normal, making ordinary life experiences feel boring and unsatisfying. This emotional dysregulation has contributed to an unprecedented mental health crisis among American teenagers. Since TikTok's widespread adoption in 2019, rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation among teenagers have increased dramatically. The American College Health Association reports that over 70% of college students now experience overwhelming anxiety, compared to less than 30% before social media became ubiquitous. But the mental health impact isn't just correlation, it's causation. TikTok's algorithm specifically promotes content related to mental health disorders, self-harm, eating disorders, and suicidal ideation because this content generates high engagement. Young people experiencing normal teenage stress and uncertainty are being algorithmically fed content that convinces them they have serious mental illnesses and should consider dangerous behaviors. The eating disorder promotion on TikTok is particularly devastating. The platform's algorithm identifies young users who show interest in fitness, body image, or weight loss content, then progressively introduces more extreme content promoting anorexia, bulimia, and other dangerous eating behaviors. This isn't accidental, it's systematic algorithmic manipulation designed to keep users engaged regardless of the psychological harm. Dr. Yana Shah, a research scientist who formerly worked for Facebook, testified before Congress that internal research showed TikTok and similar platforms specifically target insecure teenagers with content designed to worsen their mental health because psychologically vulnerable users spend more time on the platform and generate more revenue. The impact of TikTok usage is equally catastrophic. Reading proficiency among American teenagers has declined dramatically since 2019, with many high school students now reading at elementary school levels. Teachers report that students can no longer read full chapters, write coherent essays, or engage with complex texts that require sustained attention. This isn't just about reduced reading time, it's about fundamental changes to how young brains process information. TikTok's rapid-fire content delivery trains brains to expect information in tiny, disconnected fragments rather than coherent, sequential narratives. Students who can navigate TikTok expertly often cannot read a single page of text without losing focus and comprehension. The implications for higher education and career preparation are staggering. Universities report that incoming students increasingly cannot handle college-level coursework that requires reading, writing, and analytical thinking. Many colleges have had to implement remedial programs to teach basic academic skills that previous generations developed naturally through normal educational experiences. But perhaps the most concerning aspect of TikTok's impact is how it's destroying young people's capacity for independent thought and critical analysis. TikTok's algorithm creates echo chambers that are more sophisticated and more manipulative than any previous media system, gradually shaping users' beliefs, values, and worldview through carefully curated content exposure. Young people using TikTok often believe they're discovering diverse perspectives and independent voices, but they're actually being fed algorithmically selected content designed to shape their thinking in specific directions. The platform's AI systems can predict and influence user behavior with accuracy that rivals or exceeds traditional propaganda techniques. This psychological manipulation is particularly effective on developing brains that haven't yet developed strong critical thinking skills or independent identity formation. TikTok users often adopt political beliefs, lifestyle choices, and even personal identities based on algorithmic recommendations, rather than genuine personal reflection or to experience. But the most sinister aspect of TikTok's influence is its origin and ultimate purpose. TikTok is owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company that operates under the direct supervision of the Chinese Communist Party. Every piece of data collected by TikTok, including location information, contact lists, browsing habits, and detailed behavioral profiles, is accessible to Chinese intelligence agencies. But data collection is just the beginning. TikTok serves as a sophisticated influence operation designed to weaken American society by damaging the cognitive abilities and psychological health of America's next generation. While Chinese children are restricted from using TikTok and are instead encouraged to use educational apps that promote learning and critical thinking, American children are being systematically exposed to content designed to make them less intelligent, less focused, and less psychologically stable. The Chinese version of TikTok, called Douyin, promotes educational content, scientific discovery, and cultural achievement. Videos about academic success, traditional values, and national pride are algorithmically promoted to Chinese users. Meanwhile, the American version of TikTok promotes content about mental illness, sexual confusion, political extremism, and self-destructive behaviors. This isn't accidental, it's strategic. Chinese military analysts have written extensively about using social media as a weapon to weaken adversarial societies from within, by damaging the cognitive abilities and psychological health of American young people. China can reduce America's economic competitiveness, military effectiveness, and social cohesion without firing a single shot. The evidence for this intentional manipulation is overwhelming. Internal ByteDance documents revealed that the company uses different algorithms for Chinese users versus American users, specifically designed to promote different types of content in different markets. Content that would be suppressed or banned in China is actively promoted to American users, but the psychological warfare aspects extend beyond just content manipulation. TikTok's data collection capabilities allow Chinese intelligence agencies to identify and target specific American individuals for influence operations. Young people who show leadership potential, academic achievement, or other valuable characteristics can be specifically targeted with content designed to derail their development and reduce their future contribution to American society. This targeting is already happening. American military academies, government agencies, and technology companies have banned TikTok from their networks because of evidence that the platform is being used to identify and compromise personnel with access to sensitive information. But the targeting isn't limited to government and military personnel. TikTok's algorithm can identify young Americans who show potential in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, then systematically expose them to content designed to reduce their interest in these fields or redirect their attention toward less productive activities. The long-term implications are catastrophic. America's economic and military superiority depends on having an educated, focused, psychologically healthy population capable of innovation and complex problem-solving. TikTok is systematically undermining these capabilities among the generation that will determine America's future competitiveness and security. But even beyond the national security implications, TikTok is destroying fundamental human capabilities that took millions of years to evolve. The ability to focus attention, engage in deep thinking, and maintain meaningful relationships are core human capabilities that distinguish us from other animals. TikTok is systematically degrading these capabilities among young people who will never fully recover them. Dr. Sherry Turkle, an MIT psychologist who studies technology's impact on human development, has documented how TikTok usage is creating what she calls digital autism. Young people who can navigate complex digital interfaces but cannot engage in basic human interactions or emotional connections. These young people can spend hours creating and consuming TikTok content but cannot maintain a 5-minute conversation without checking their phones. They can understand complex social media dynamics but cannot read basic emotional cues from family members or friends. They are becoming digitally sophisticated but humanly impaired. The social skills destruction is particularly concerning because these capabilities develop during specific developmental windows that, once closed, cannot be reopened. young people who miss critical periods for learning face-to-face communication, emotional regulation, and relationship formation may never fully develop these capabilities even if their technology usage is later restricted. This creates a generation of Americans who are fundamentally less capable of the human connections and collaborative relationships necessary for democratic society, economic innovation, and cultural development. They become dependent on digital mediation for all social interaction, making them more susceptible to manipulation and control by the platforms that facilitate those interactions. But the destruction goes beyond individual cognitive and social development. TikTok is systematically undermining cultural transmission, the process by which societies pass knowledge, values, and traditions from one generation to the next. Previous generations learned about history, literature, science, and culture through books, schools, museums, and family conversations that required sustained attention and deep engagement. TikTok replaces this deep cultural transmission with superficial, fragmented, often inaccurate information delivered in formats that prevent genuine understanding or retention. Young people increasingly get their understanding of history from TikTok videos that reduce complex historical events to 30-second oversimplifications, often containing factual errors or political propaganda. They learn about science from influencers rather than textbooks, about literature from social media summaries rather than original texts, about culture from viral trends rather than lived traditions. This replacement of deep cultural knowledge with shallow digital content creates a generation that is increasingly disconnected from the intellectual and cultural foundations of American society. They may know the latest TikTok trends but be completely ignorant of the historical, philosophical, and scientific knowledge necessary for informed citizenship and cultural continuity. The political implications are equally alarming. TikTok's algorithm specifically promotes political content designed to increase polarization and social conflict among American users. The platform amplifies the most extreme voices on all sides of political debates while suppressing moderate, nuanced perspectives that might promote understanding and compromise. This algorithmic extremism promotion is creating a generation of Americans who see politics as entertainment rather than civic responsibility, who prefer performative outrage to constructive dialogue, and who cannot engage with political ideas that challenge their existing beliefs. The result is a generation that is more politically active on social media but less capable of the real-world political engagement necessary for democratic governance. They can create viral political content but cannot engage in the patient, sustained political work necessary for actual policy change and social progress. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of TikTok's impact is how it's stealing childhood itself from young people. Previous generations had extended periods of childhood where they could develop imagination, creativity, and independent thinking through unstructured play and exploration. TikTok replaces this natural developmental process with constant digital stimulation that prevents the kind of boredom and quiet reflection necessary for creative and intellectual development. Young people who should be developing their own interests and identities are instead consuming endless streams of content created by others. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness on a massive scale. Young people who become passive consumers of digital content rather than active creators of their own experiences and ideas. They lose the capacity for self-directed learning, intrinsic motivation, and independent thought that previous generations developed naturally. The creativity data is particularly alarming. Studies show that creative thinking abilities among American children have declined dramatically since social media became widespread, with the most significant declines occurring among the heaviest social media users. Young people who spend hours creating TikTok content often score lower on creativity assessments than those who engage in traditional creative activities. This suggests that TikTok's supposed creativity is actually a form of constrained algorithmic expression that reduces rather than enhances genuine creative abilities. Users feel creative because they're manipulating digital tools, but they're actually following algorithmic patterns rather than developing original ideas or artistic expression. But beyond creativity, TikTok is undermining the development of work ethic and delayed gratification psychological capabilities essential for academic and career success. TikTok's instant gratification delivery system trains young brains to expect immediate rewards for minimal effort, making them increasingly incapable of the sustained effort necessary for meaningful achievement. Students who can spend hours creating TikTok videos often cannot complete homework assignments that require sustained attention and effort. They become accustomed to receiving immediate feedback and validation through likes and comments, making them unable to persist through difficult tasks that don't provide instant rewards. This psychological conditioning creates young adults who struggle with basic employment requirements like showing up on time, following instructions, and completing tasks without constant supervision and feedback. Employers increasingly report that recent graduates lack the basic work habits and persistence necessary for entry-level positions. The economic implications are staggering. America's economic competitiveness depends on having a workforce capable of learning complex skills, solving difficult problems, and adapting to changing technological and economic conditions. TikTok is creating a generation that lacks these fundamental capabilities, but the individual economic costs are equally devastating. Young people with damaged attention spans, poor work habits, and limited real-world skills face dramatically reduced career prospects and lifetime earning potential. They become dependent on jobs that accommodate their digital addictions rather than careers that utilize their full human potential. This creates a vicious cycle where TikTok-damaged young people become economically dependent on the digital economy that caused their problems, making them even more susceptible to manipulation and control by technology companies. But what makes TikTok's impact so insidious is how it's designed to be invisible to both users and parents. The platform creates the illusion that users are making independent choices about what content to consume, while actually manipulating their behavior through sophisticated psychological techniques. Parents often don't recognize the severity of the problem because TikTok usage appears to be harmless entertainment rather than neurological manipulation. Young people seem happy and engaged while using the platform, masking the underlying cognitive and psychological damage being inflicted. The delayed effects mean that the full impact of TikTok exposure doesn't become apparent until years later, when academic performance declines, mental health problems emerge, and social functioning deteriorates. By then, the neurological damage is largely irreversible, but there are signs that parents and educators can watch for to identify TikTok-related cognitive damage before it becomes irreversible. Declining attention span, increased anxiety when separated from devices, deteriorating academic performance, loss of interest in non-digital activities, and inability to engage in extended conversations are all early warning signs of TikTok-induced neurological problems. However, simply restricting TikTok access isn't sufficient to reverse the damage once it's occurred. Young people who have become neurologically dependent on digital stimulation often require professional intervention to restore normal brain functioning and develop healthy relationship with technology. This intervention needs to include digital detox periods, cognitive behavioral therapy, and gradual retraining of attention and focus capabilities. But recovery is difficult and time-consuming, and many young people never fully recover the cognitive abilities they had before TikTok exposure. The most effective approach is prevention, keeping young people from developing TikTok addiction in the first place. This requires parents to understand the true nature of what TikTok does to developing brains and to prioritize their children's neurological health over short-term convenience or social pressures. But individual prevention efforts won't solve the broader social problem created by TikTok's mass neurological manipulation. Protecting an entire generation requires collective action to address TikTok as the psychological warfare operation that it actually represents. This means treating TikTok as a national security threat rather than an entertainment platform, implementing restrictions on data collection and algorithmic manipulation, and potentially banning the platform entirely, as several countries have already done. But even beyond TikTok specifically, protecting young people's cognitive development requires fundamental changes to how we regulate social media platforms and design digital technologies. We need to prioritize human flourishing over corporate profits, psychological health over engagement metrics, and long-term social well-being over short-term convenience. The evidence is overwhelming. TikTok is causing measurable, permanent damage to an entire generation of American young people. The neurological, psychological, academic, and social costs are catastrophic, and the implications for America's future are devastating. But there's still time to prevent the worst outcomes, if enough people understand what's happening and demand action to protect young people from this psychological warfare operation disguised as entertainment. The question is whether American society will wake up to what TikTok is actually doing before the damage becomes irreversible. Because once an entire generation's cognitive abilities have been permanently impaired, there may be no recovery for individuals or for the society they will shape. TikTok isn't just destroying individual young people, it's destroying America's future. And the people orchestrating this destruction are celebrating every day that Americans remain ignorant about what's really happening to their children's brains. The choice is stark. Continue allowing TikTok to systematically damage young people's neurological development, or take action to protect an entire generation from the most sophisticated psychological manipulation tool ever created. But that choice won't remain available indefinitely. Every day that TikTok continues operating, millions more young brains are being damaged in ways that will affect them for the rest of their lives. The window for preventing a neurological catastrophe is closing rapidly.